Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Safety and Health magazine webinar sponsored by AlertMedia. Want to let you know as you file in, you are in the right place. Just going to allow a little bit more time for some more folks to get settled. We'll get things going in about a minute. Hello again. Thanks for joining us. Just letting you know as you file in, you are in the right place. We're going to get things going in about 30 seconds, just allowing a little more time for some more people to log on. Okay, well, now an official hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Safety and Health webcast. Do employees feel safe at work? New data for 2023, sponsored by AlertMedia. My name is Kevin Drewley. I'm an associate editor with Safety and Health magazine, and will be moderating today's session. Thanks for joining us. In a few minutes, we'll start a presentation, but first, let's review some preliminary items. The views of today's speakers and organizations are their own and may not necessarily reflect those of the National Safety Council or Safety and Health magazine. Any mention of a commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not necessarily mean the council or magazine endorses those items. We will conduct an ongoing question and answer session throughout today's presentation. To ask a question, simply click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type your question, and click the send button. Feel free to ask your question at any time. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible, but because of the large number of participants today, we might not get to every question. Any unanswered questions will be forwarded along to today's speakers. At the end of the webcast, you'll be asked to complete a brief evaluation survey. I'll let you know more about that after the presentation. Today's webcast will be archived, so you can access it after the live event. To view this webcast and all of our past webcasts, please visit safetyandhealthmagazine.com/events. With that, we now like to introduce Katie Goen, Director of Content and Communications at AlertMedia, who will tell us more about today's speakers and take things from here. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Kevin, and hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here to moderate today's discussion. We've all been really looking forward to this webinar today because we get to reveal some incredible insights from AlertMedia's second annual State of Employee Safety Report with fresh data for 2023. So I think you're going to find this information really helpful, interesting, and maybe even surprising in some cases. So what we're going to do today is give you some of the key takeaways from the report, but we're also going to give you some tips and some advice for how to use this data to inform your preparedness plans, maybe your employee safety communication strategies, or even use it to kind of attract and retain talent, right, in this highly competitive market that we're in. I do want to mention, as Kevin said, today's webinar will be interactive. So instead of one longer questions portion at the end of the webinar, we're going to pause after each section to get your questions, your feedback, your comments, really anything that you have to offer. So be on the lookout for those moments. And then we do have a couple of polls as well. So we would love your participation in those as they come up. So with that, I would love to introduce you to today's speakers. Our featured guest today is John Yarbrough. He's the Vice President of Communications at AlertMedia. So he's responsible for developing and implementing brand marketing strategies that support the company's mission, which is to help organizations keep their employees safe. For the past 15 years or so, John has held marketing leadership roles supporting content and communication strategy for various technology companies. Some of those include Lifesize, BigCommerce, and Microsoft. And John is a graduate from the University of Texas at Austin, where he earned his bachelor's degree in corporate communications. John, thanks so much for being here. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for the very kind intro.
Absolutely. Well, I also want to welcome Peter Steinfeld, who's here with us today. He's been involved in the emergency communications industry for more than 20 years now. He's the Senior Vice President of Safety Solutions at AlertMedia. So he works closely with a wide range of organizations to support their emergency preparedness, business continuity, and employee safety initiatives. He's also the host of the Employee Safety Podcast at AlertMedia. So he interviews just fantastic leaders from organizations like FEMA, the CDC, Zoom, Salesforce. I could go on and on. So you'll want to check out that show if you ever get a chance. And Peter, thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Absolutely. Great to be here. This is one of my favorite webinars of the year, just because we get to share information through a lens that's often ignored, and that's the employee view. So super happy to present this information to everyone.
Wonderful. Well, I do want to give you just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. Here are some of the key research topics from the State of Employee Safety Report that we'll be discussing. And that is includes answers to questions like, do employers and employees feel the same about workplace safety? How does work location impact employees' feelings about safety practices and trainings and things of that nature? Are employees receiving enough mental health support at work? And finally, how can organizations make employees feel safer and more valued? So I would like to go ahead and launch our first poll before we dive into the content here. And the question on your screen reads, which aspect of employee safety currently needs the most improvement at your organization? So would you say it's the physical safety? Maybe it's, psychological safety / mental health, business traveler safety. Business travel is seeing such a huge comeback since the pandemic ended. Remote or hybrid worker safety, or maybe it's those safety communications, which is always a big one as well. So I'm going to give that just another couple seconds. If you could all get your responses in now, that would be great. And then let's go ahead and share those responses so we can all have a look. Okay, well, the good news is all of the answers are somewhat represented here on the slide, so that means we are on the right track. But it looks like that psychological safety and mental health component is what's top of mind for our attendees today. So let me ask you, John, is that surprising to you, or is that about what you thought you'd see here?
I think that this quick poll reflects a lot of what we saw in the research as well, which is safety varies quite a bit from organization to organization, and employees experience it in different ways, depending on their job duties or industries. So good to know that we'll have some research that hopefully addresses some of the questions in each of these different buckets.
Mm-hmm. And Peter, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, coming out of the pandemic, this, I think, lines directly with that. Obviously, mental health has become a really big issue. There's a big flashlight that was shown on that. So it's a concern for a lot of folks now, whereas previously, maybe not so much. And then, of course, travelers aren't necessarily back to where they were prior to the pandemic quite yet. So it's not a huge concern for people. So pretty much in alignment with what I was thinking. This is great.
Perfect. Well, I think we should just go ahead and dive into it. Peter and John, I'll turn it over to you to discuss why this research is important, but also some of the methodology that was used for the survey. So Peter, would you mind kicking things off for us?
Absolutely. And I think this context will help because there's a lot of information in this report. I'll highly encourage you to go download it and read through it. We're only going to scratch the surface here. But I'll start just by saying that I think many of us would agree that employee safety is really, really important and should be top of mind for any organization out there, not just the biggest ones. We've all seen studies and reports on this topic, but more often than not, the employee perspective, like I mentioned before, is missing from the conversation. So to help change that, AlertMedia commissioned a survey from the firm Material to ask employees directly how they feel about the safety of their workplace and how they think their employers value employee safety. I think you're going to find some interesting disconnects there that should be addressed. We also need data, in my opinion, that's more inclusive demographically. Prior reports in this area have really looked at workforce trends that are specific to a particular industry or related to a specific incident, such as the pandemic. But today's workforce is just very different than it was pre-pandemic. So our goal really was to cast a very wide net and survey a large range of employees to get a really accurate reflection of current perceptions across industries, across generations, and different types of groups, subsets of groups within the employee group set. And John's going to talk a bit more about that later in the presentation. And then finally, we really wanted to compile data that was applicable to any organization, no matter the size, the industry, or the location. We thought that was really important. And as Katie said, we want to give you data that you can actually use to your advantage. Now, by conducting the study annually, we've been able to draw conclusions about how employees' perceptions of the workplace and their safety in it have really shifted year over year. So I think that context is huge and is important for identifying trend lines. And as we learn from conducting our inaugural State of Safety report in 2022, it's really important to address the current challenges that both employers and employees are experiencing for the most accurate and relevant insights. The current threat landscape, for example, nearly every organization has experienced the impacts of recent severe weather events or natural disasters. They're always out there, no matter where they are, anywhere in the world. Disasters and other disruptive events are just becoming more frequent, more severe, and more intense. And there's a lot more people being impacted by them, just because of the nature of the population growing so much. So it really makes employee safety more important than ever. And then you've got things like geopolitical upheaval and tension, like the Russia-Ukraine war, has really impacted many employees' perceptions of the world, as well as the business operations of a lot of organizations can be disrupted by things like that. So that's another factor contributing to employee safety right now. And then when you add things like the financial stress caused by global economic instability in an uncertain labor market, we're all seeing that. The result really is an American workforce that's just generally speaking a little bit more worried than they have been in the recent past, with pandemic aside, and they're just kind of stretched thin at work. Now, speaking of stress, the pressures and turmoil of the pandemic have caused a lot of workers to experiencing new or worsening mental health conditions that impact the workplace, leading to more emphasis placed on improving employees' psychological safety. So that's something you'll hear about as John goes through some of the data. But just to summarize, the research really is important because it can equip you with insights on how to better protect your people from current threats, as well as some context on what they need right now to feel safer on the job. Additionally, I say this all the time, you can tug on the heartstrings of your executives with emotional, anecdotal stories about safety and security, but you can tug on the purse strings of these executives with hard empirical evidence. That's what they require. And this report provides that. So please use it to your advantage. All right, John, with that said, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to kind of go into more about the methodology for conducting the survey that informed this current 2023 State of Employee Safety report.
Thanks, Peter. That was a phenomenal summary and some great context as we get into the data. Before we get into the specific findings, I wanted to just briefly touch on the background of when and how this research was conducted. So first, this was a survey that was fielded over a 2-week period in January of 2023. So all of the data that you're going to see today is very recent. And we thought that was particularly important given how much the workforce itself has experienced over the last 12 months. Peter just touched on several of the key trends, but also we've seen this massive change in terms of where people are conducting the work as more companies call their employees back to the office, at least more frequently than they were during the pandemic. Should also note that this research reflects responses from more than 2,000 full-time employed Americans. This was important for us because it gave us a robust data set that we could draw conclusions from, but it also allowed us to do various cuts of the data, which informed our analysis and allowed us to compare different employee cohorts and demographic groups, as Peter touched on. And then finally, we intentionally did survey a fairly broad cross-section of working Americans, and that include a broad array of industries, but also quite a bit of diversity in terms of seniority, comparing those more tenured employees' perceptions as well as those earlier in their careers. To the extent that we could, we tried to normalize this data to account for geography, industry, gender, age, racial diversity, following as closely as possible to the most recent US Census data. So to the best of our ability, we think this is an accurate reflection of the current US workforce. And with that, Katie can advance to the next slide. We'll talk about some of our findings. So to kick things off, wanted to give you a little bit of context on the data points that you'll hear more about throughout today's presentation. Last year, when we conducted this research for the first time, we asked a very simple question, which was asking employees to tell us how important their physical safety was to them at work. And what we found was 97% of respondents said, yes, my physical safety is very important to me. So this year, we wanted to be a little more nuanced. We wanted to delve a little deeper into those perceptions. So we asked employees to expand upon how they felt about safety at work. And we also asked them to expand upon how they felt about what their employers have done to help keep them safe and informed. So let's get into some of the specific metrics and findings. On the left, you can see here, right off the bat, that roughly half of working Americans are feeling some anxiety about the state of the world. So as Peter touched on, there's been a lot going on over the past 12 months. Roughly 49% of employees said that they felt the world is more dangerous today than it was just a few years ago. Also interesting, we found that roughly 3 out of every 4 employees believe that their employer's current safety efforts have not been very effective. So it doesn't mean that their employer isn't trying, but from the employee perspective, some of those efforts are not landing to the extent that they would like them to. And then similarly, we found just over 70% of employees did not feel that their employer is making good and following through on some of the safety promises that were made during the pandemic. So what can we take away from this data? So first and foremost, a big chunk of the workforce is not feeling fully prepared to navigate what they perceive to be an increasingly dangerous world. It's also fair to surmise that not every employer that's made this concerted effort to take care of their employees, to demonstrate the duty of care and their commitment to employees, all of that is really landing to the extent the employers would probably like. And then finally, we think that the data also implies that a lot of organizations are probably struggling from lower than desired employee trust, engagement, loyalty, all of these things that we know safety influences at work. So that was a lot of perhaps not so great data, but I'll also note that the research also uncovered some very specific key things that employers can do to make a positive impact in their employer's perception, and we will cover that during today's presentation as well. Katie and Peter has touched on this, so I won't spend too much time here, but we're going to just hit the tip of the iceberg during today's presentation. This report is chock full of data that you can all use. We think it's incredibly relevant. So hopefully we'll give you some information you can use today, but we encourage you to read the full report as well. The first theme that we're going to cover in some detail today is specifically about employees' perception of workplace safety and comparing that to what they believe is important to their employers. And as Peter mentioned, we uncovered some pretty important differences between those two things. So on this slide, what you're going to see is respondents' perceptions of various aspects of workplace experience. So what we asked them specifically was to rate how important various aspects of work are to them. And then we also asked them to rate how important those very same facets of work are to their employer. I should note that both of these responses are from the employee's perception. So this doesn't necessarily reflect accurately what the organization is doing or their philosophies or even the culture of the organization. This is strictly the employee's experience. So first, you can see here that 4 out of 5 employees said physical safety is very important to them, but less than 3 in 5 thought it was similarly important to their employer. Similarly, 65% of employees said that feeling satisfied with their work was something they highly value, but less than half of them said that they thought that that was a priority to their employer, to the company that they work for. And then perhaps less surprising is the inverse was true when we asked employees to respond to how important they thought productivity was. So here you see the inverse. You see roughly 80% of employees believe that their employer places this high value on their productivity, but it's relatively speaking less important to their employer. And we think that this is particularly interesting when you rate how employees perceive productivity relative to something like safety at work. So on the next slide, we'll go a little further into the context and just talk a little bit about what this data means. So when we asked employees what feeling safe at work meant to them in terms of their overall relationship with their employer, what we found is there's this strong correlation between perception of safety and satisfaction and employees' long-term loyalty and desire to stay with their organization. For example, just under half of employees said that they would be motivated to stay with their company for the long term if they believe their employer genuinely cared about their safety and well-being. So again, you can see this very interesting connection between employees' desire to feel safe at all times when working, and also how that influences their perception of job opportunity overall. Is this a place that I want to continue to grow my career? So with that, I'm gonna pause. I'm gonna hand it back over to Peter to talk a little bit more about how we can apply some of this data.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can use this information to your advantage without a doubt. We'll talk a bit about that, but especially since it can help you foster employee loyalty and job satisfaction, which is huge, especially with turnover being such a big issue these days. One way is to use the data is to essentially create and implement an effective communication strategy. So your people are basically in the know about any safety updates or general safety policies, protocols, and procedures. That's one thing you'll see if there's a disconnect between what people think and what they think their employer thinks. It's probably a communication breakdown. So, wake up call. We got to do a better job communicating. So use it as an opportunity to communicate to your people that employee safety is indeed your top priority. And then you can back that up by involving your employees in the conversation. Do things like solicit feedback by asking them what would make them feel safer. Pretty simple, but important thing to do. Or if they've observed any safety issues that need to be addressed. And your communication strategy should also include identifying which employees to communicate with and when. For example, not every employee company-wide needs to receive a message about a faulty piece of equipment that only a handful of employees use, because that could cause confusion or just a bunch of unnecessary questions. And then, of course, even worse, they'll ignore the next message that you send out, possibly one that's targeted to them. But every employee does need to know about a new process for reporting safety or security concerns to their manager. So you see the difference there? You can also up-level your communication strategy by investing in a modern, easy-to-use emergency communication solution for both emergency and business-critical type communications. Instead of relying on a single channel like just email that might not be effective for some or all, some of your people just don't even have access to email sometimes. So in certain situations, it's not going to work out. There are systems that enable you to send messages to multiple channels simultaneously, like including email, but also accompanying that with a text message, a voice call, something that pops up on their computer screen, Slack, Teams, and a whole lot more. You can even solicit feedback in the form of read confirmations or survey style notifications. And that real-time feedback can be really helpful to understand who is and who is not receiving your messages, as well as providing you with insight on where to focus your efforts based on the nature of the responses received. Now, what differentiates this research is that there's not a lot of hard data out there on this subject. Safety leaders must typically rely on things like injury or accident rates to justify bigger investments in safety. So with this new information, you can directly see how employees' unmet needs surrounding safety could be contributing to turnover or lack of employee engagement or productivity and job satisfaction, obviously, at your company. So Katie, back to you.
Yeah, I actually think this is a great time to pause so we can get some feedback from our audience. There's a question here, John, but I think maybe Peter, you can weigh in on it as well. But let's start with John. Was communication fatigue mentioned at all in the survey? I'm wondering if there are employees who feel like their employer over communicates.
We did ask in the survey how employees prefer to be communicated with around all kinds of various workplace incidents, from severe weather and natural disasters to nearby crime or workplace violence. What we found is there are nuances. Some employees would prefer to receive less information. Other employees would prefer to receive more. I think the commonality across is that there is a bias towards employees wanting to be informed either before or during or after the incident. So the vast majority, at least, said that they would expect their employer to let them know about potential safety incidents, but there are important distinctions based on the nature of the incident itself, which we cover a little bit in the report.
And Peter, do you have any tips on how to avoid communication fatigue if folks are experiencing it?
Yeah, I think this is a tough one because you can't please all the people all the time. There's always someone that's going to complain, positive or negative. It was too much, it was too little. So you got to do your best. But I think generally speaking, what you want to do is try to be very targeted in your communications. Like I mentioned before, if someone really just shouldn't get that message, don't include them, because when you do have something important for them, they're going to ignore it because they're tired of receiving too many messages. The other thing is to really rethink how you communicate. I always say bite-sized chunks are much better than lots of information. Even in trainings, people, that's what they typically complain about. They're like, well, you didn't train me enough, but you say, I gave you an hour-long training session. Well, that was too long and I didn't really pay attention. So kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. So always just try to think, how can I distill this to the most important information? And is it going to the right people? Just think a little bit before you send it out. And I think that will help solve a lot of the issues.
And Peter, I'm going to stick with you there for a minute because we have a question along the same lines. Do you know how communications are received and understood? Or I'm sorry, how do you know that communications are received and understood by your employees?
Well, you have to get some kind of feedback. Now, it depends on the type of communication. If you're just communicating about training, there's one way to do that. If you're in the middle of an emergency, you really need to give them an opportunity to respond back. So that's where I talked about using a modern multi-channel emergency communication system. It's kind of something that's a must-have these days. If there's some kind of incident going on, you want to be able to blast a message out across multiple channels and then give people the opportunity to respond to even just a very simple survey like, yes, I'm okay, I got the message. No, I'm not okay, I need help. Just some simple responses that they can provide. And then the senders of that message should be able to quickly digest that information. And then that will help direct what they're going to do next to respond to the situation.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, I think let's go ahead and move on to the next survey question. So John, what do you have for us?
All right. So I saw the poll at the beginning of today's presentation and noticed that this is not perhaps the most pertinent topic for the majority of our attendees. So we're going to spend just a few minutes here, but we did want to briefly touch on business travel because it's an interesting use case in terms of how do you make your traveling employees feel safe? And we actually saw some research just prior to the research that we conducted that found roughly 78% of those accountable for corporate travel are expecting a higher number of business trips this year than they did in 2022, which of course was higher than 2021 and 2020 due to the pandemic. So with that in mind, we'll just spend a couple minutes looking at business travel specifically and some of the safety perceptions around that. So I'll first note that's not a data point that's not captured here on the slide, that our research found that 38% of employees are expected to travel in some capacity for work. Given the very broad the nature of this survey and the various levels of seniority that were included in the research, we actually thought that was a fairly high figure, which is another reason why we thought it was worth covering here. But what you can see here is as it relates to employees' perceptions of safety, travel is distinct and it's very multifaceted. For some employees, and you can see at the left side of the slide here, simple things like travel delays and disruptions are worrisome to them. And we think that there's an interesting component of that has to do with their perceptions that employers place this very high value on productivity. So you can imagine as an employee, if you're experiencing disruptions, you may also be worried about how your employer is perceiving you. Are you, not doing your job as effectively as you otherwise could have? But you also see here some more traditional safety information. So safety, sickness ranked very highly, which is consistent with the very high value that employees put on their physical well-being. Peter just touched on communication, so I'll also highlight that roughly 1/3 of employees that travel for work express concerns about just not being familiar with their travel destination, not feeling prepared to go to a new location or geography, something that is outside of their typical day-to-day, which we think is a clear opportunity for employers to do a better job of preparing them in advance. So on the next slide, we'll just touch a little bit more on some of the context here. Again, we did this survey a year ago. Our research a year ago found that the overwhelming majority of employees felt that it is their employer's duty of care to keep them safe when working from an office or corporate facility or from home. But when we asked them about whose responsibility it is to keep them safe and informed when traveling, we actually found that many don't know, but many don't really receive this type of information from their employer currently. Many don't even know that they probably should be receiving this type of information. So again, what we thought was most relevant here is less than half of travelers feel extremely safe when they travel for work. Again, less than half, only 41% can recall ever receiving information about potential safety risks or instructions about how to stay safe when traveling for work. And only about half of employees said that they would feel confident knowing who they should reach out to, where they should go for support or additional information if there was some type of safety incident while they were traveling. So Peter, I'll hand it over to you once more to talk a little bit more about what you think is most relevant from these data points.
Yeah, absolutely. So if your organization has business travelers, consider conducting a travel risk assessment before each trip, as it makes sense. Certainly, there's more risky places in the world than others, but you can start with these very basic 3 questions, which is a little tip that I learned from security and travel risk expert Brian Cook when he was a guest on the podcast. And the questions are pretty straightforward. Who is going? Where are they going? And what are they doing? These will definitely help you determine what potential risks your employee might experience along the way. And then you can communicate this information to the traveler to help keep them safer. The other big thing is the traveler, as John was alluding to, should really know who to contact at your organization if something goes wrong, as well as just general tips for protecting themselves and their company data while they're away. Don't forget about company data. Things like, should they even take a different laptop? Do they know how to use a VPN? A lot of people don't. All things that you should consider. And then you should also consider proactively monitoring threats near your business traveler's destination. And if you don't have the team or the bandwidth to do that in-house, which many organizations just don't, you can invest in a threat intelligence solution to do that for you. Just a lot of information out there and hard to stay on top of. So I know it sounds like business travel isn't a huge issue for you guys, so we'll skip through the rest of the points here. But just kind of remember, as people are starting to get back out in the field, you want to extend that duty of care to your travelers, just like you do to people behind the 4 walls that they normally come into every day, or perhaps at their homes. Katie, back to you.
Thanks so much, Peter. And actually, we're not getting a lot of questions about business travel, like you said, but we did get one at the end of the last section. So sorry to throw you all off, but I do want to just throw it in real quick just to make sure we have some clarity. So someone wants to know, John, can you just clarify the data about employees thinking their employers may not feel the same way they do about physical safety, job satisfaction, productivity? Just to be clear, that was the employees that responded that way, correct? Not the employers themselves.
That's right. Yeah, it's an important distinction that this is solely a perception study from the employee perspective. I will note that some of the respondents are in senior management positions, so there is some sampling that is somebody that may be accountable for safety initiatives, or at least partially responsible for the culture of safety within their organization. But I'd say that the vast majority of responses are from employees that are the recipient of the type of safety information, training, and policies that Peter touched on previously.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, John. Well, what is the next insight or surprising finding you'd like to share with us?
Sure. Next, we're going to talk a little bit more about work locations. We talked about travel. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about employees working from home, working full-time, those working at a corporate facility or office full-time, as well as those that work in a hybrid environment, and compare and contrast some of their perceptions. So I'll start on the left side of this slide and note that right off the page, you can see that there's still a very large percentage of the workforce that's working from home in some capacity. Now, we did see a slight dip versus when we conducted this research a year ago, but it's still more than 2 in 5 employees working from home in some capacity. So Peter will touch on this a little bit more, but really important that we make that portion of the workforce feel included when we're talking about safety communications and trainings and ways that we can engage the workforce. As it relates to employers' safety efforts, we think it also highlights the importance of balancing what you're doing for in-person, in-office employees versus those who are not physically present. So we know that a lot of people struggle with this, which is, how do I make sure that the training that I'm doing is inclusive for all? How do I make sure it's relevant to all? And unfortunately, there's no one size fits all solution there, but we do think that the research validates that it's important to continue to experiment and try to find ways to make the information that you are putting out to your workforce accessible to all, regardless of where they spend the majority of their time. And on the right, you can see how work environment impacts employees' perception of safety. So we found that employees who work from home full-time, they do tend to feel safer versus those that are venturing out into the world, either to make it to their job at a corporate facility or, and even in a hybrid environment, those that are commuting in just a couple of days a week. So, you've all probably read and experienced conversations about ways that we can get employees back into the office. And from our vantage point, that conversation is often about employees' desire to reduce time commuting or the conveniences of being available to pick up kids from school, which are all super valid. But what we think this data also highlights is that simply by addressing safety concerns, there's likely an opportunity on that level alone to compel more folks back into your corporate facilities and help them feel comfortable with that transition. So we're going to just focus for a couple minutes here on remote workers specifically. And we did observe some interesting differences between people working from home versus those working in the office. And the top point here is really important. Remote workers tend to not think their safety is important to their employer as those who come into the office. And this was pretty consistent across all demographic groups. And we believe that there are several factors at play here. For one, those employees likely have less visibility into safety programs and probably do not see all of the ways that their organization is trying to keep them safe and trying to keep them informed. So, again, going back to the perception issue, perception is not always reality, as we all know. So it may have more to do with awareness than it does, truly about an organization's effort to keep the workforce safe and informed. And then also we do know that many remote workers still have lingering fears or anxiety stemming from the pandemic. So helping them feel comfortable with that transition, helping them understand what you're doing from a public safety standpoint, or public health standpoint, we think is also important. At the bottom of the slide, you can see another interesting difference that our research highlights, and that's that remote employees tend to get offered less training than their colleagues working in an office. So I touched on this. We know that a lot of this has to do with this desire to avoid over communication or the desire to avoid notification fatigue. These are all very valid concerns. But our research did find that employees largely do want to be informed. They want to be included. They have this bias towards let me make the decision on whether I participate versus excluding me, just based on the fact that I am a remote employee and not going to be at a corporate facility every day. So Peter, I'll hand it back to you to talk a little bit more about this.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think the way you can use this data is pretty straightforward. Organizations should absolutely extend their duty of care to include both hybrid and fully remote workers. It's good for the employee and good for the organization because safe employees are just more productive employees. Just go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Unless you feel safe, you can't do anything else. So if you can help people feel safe, they're going to be more productive for you. So start by ensuring that all your safety initiatives and trainings are fully inclusive of all those types of workers, no matter where they are. Every worker should feel safe and protected while working, no matter where they work. Every employee can and should contribute to your safety culture. That's important, whether they're at home, in the field, traveling, or on site every day. Got to look at it holistically, not just for the people behind your four walls. Now, for remote employees, you can send them regular messaging about things like cyber safety and how to ensure their home IP address and company data are secure, home safety, like what to do in case of a fire or other emergency. Another really good one that's often overlooked is ergonomic risks for their home office workstations. Many people put themselves in suboptimal, I call it work from the couch type positions for very long periods of time, and that's not good. Also important is communicating about threats near their homes that could potentially impact their safety. And then lastly, help them understand the resources or services near their homes if there's an evacuation or a power outage. We saw that as a big deal with the wildfires in California not too long ago. So this proactive approach really will help your remote employees feel just more included and protected, and that their safety is important to you. So Katie, I'll toss it back to you. I think I saw some good questions come in over the Q&A channel.
Yes, 100%. So, John, I'm going to send this one along to you. Why do employees feel safer at home? Do they have generators, water/MREs? I'm trying to understand that this is a false sense of security. What are your thoughts?
It's a great question. We did not ask specifically in the research on what was driving that perception. So that's a great note for next time. Maybe we'll look for opportunities to ask them for more color around their perceptions. What we believe to be true is those that have been working from home full time, there are many that have grown accustomed to that environment and largely through the context of safety. So I think intuitively, we know there's been a lot of conversation about public health and safety through the lens of I want to avoid getting sick. That many of us, have had that message drilled into us for months, if not years. So I think for some, it may have more to do with the perception of things outside of their control. We saw a correlation of feeling less safe for those that are commuting. We felt a very strong correlation for employees feeling less safe if they have to take public transit to work, as well as some of the differences between those at a corporate work site versus at home. So I'm not sure I can perfectly answer the question, but we think it has a lot to do with it just being an environment they do not have full control over.
And probably the pandemic too.
Indeed.
Mm.
Yeah.
And John, I know that you answered an audience question via chat, but if you could just tell the whole group, someone asked, when you say at the office, does that actually mean any sort of job site, or are we just talking about an office?
It's a great question, and I'm glad that we can clarify. Yes, our research did prompt respondents to weigh in through the lens of any type of corporate facility. So that could be a traditional office building, that could be a corporate owned and operated work site, it could be some other facility, a warehouse, et cetera. So when you're thinking about the differences between at home versus at the office, quote unquote, it's a fairly broad definition.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to go ahead and move on here just so we have enough time for our next data points. So John, what's up next?
All right. Well, here, I'm glad that we're able to touch on a topic that so many people said is top of mind for them right now. So we did conduct some research about mental health support and perceptions amongst employees that we thought was pretty compelling. And on the next couple of slides, we'll show you some of our findings. So similar to the data we reviewed earlier in today's presentation, here we're showing data comparing how important mental health is to employees versus how important they believe it is to their employer. So again, I want to clarify, this is through the employee's lens. This is their perception. It's not truly a reflection of the employer's efforts. It's how does the employee perceive their employer to think about mental health. So mental health is similar to physical safety and health, and that employees think it's more important to them personally than it is to their employer. And of course, this highlights that there's an opportunity for employers to be more proactive about how they demonstrate to their workforce that, hey, when we think about your well-being, when we think about our duty of care to you, we want it to be holistic. We don't want it just to be about your physical safety. We want you to be thinking about your psychological safety as well, and your ability to bring your best self to work and to feel as though that you're able to do work that feels safe holistically. So on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about employees' perceptions of mental health in the workplace. I'm sure everybody on today's webinar knows that mental health can have a major influence over employees' overall engagement. We probably all experienced this personally. When you're not feeling at your best from a mental health standpoint, you're probably also struggling with job satisfaction, productivity, long-term retention. Generally, a lot of research in the market has demonstrated as an employee mental health suffers, so too does their overall engagement with their employer. So these are just a few data points to further support the rationale that all the effort you put into mental health programs can make a major impact on your employees. So starting on the left, our research found that only about 1/3 of employees believe that their employer is making an active effort to support their mental health today. This, of course, also means that roughly 2/3 of employees do not believe their employer is making an active effort to support their mental health. So clearly there's a gap here in terms of what employers are likely doing and and what employees are actually looking for. Perhaps some may have not started mental health programs at all, but this was a fairly negative data point in terms of what employees are looking for from their organizations. In the middle, you can see only about 38% of our respondents said that they had knowledge or believed that their organization had any type of formal mental health resources. This, again, was something that was a little bit lower than we thought would be the case. And then only about 1 in 3 said that they felt that they could have an open and comfortable dialogue about their mental health in the workplace. So, overall, there's some opportunity for improvement here. And, our hope is that when we conduct this research a year from now, we'll see, better, more positive responses and a positive movement in employees' perceptions. But this, among all the topics that we surveyed our employees on in this year's research, was probably the biggest area for improvement. Peter, what are your thoughts on the application of some of the data here?
Yeah, I think you can start by making mental health just a higher priority. Writing off this element of safety really directly contradicts what employees say is important to them. And as we discussed earlier, your employees have been through a lot over the past few years with things like the pandemic, the intensifying threat landscape, economic concerns, and a whole lot more. And all these really end up just grating on the psyche, affecting people differently. And that's the problem. Like, some people just deal with it like, oh, no problem. And then others are traumatized by it and everything in between. And you never know, like, what lens is someone bringing to work. So with that in mind, here are a few ways that you can prioritize mental health in the workplace. So first and foremost, make sure your EAP, your employee assistance program, is comprehensive and robust. And then, this is something people forget, be sure to communicate about it. Employees can't utilize these resources if they don't know about them. That's a huge thing. A lot of organizations have it, but nobody knows about it. Or they're maybe a little embarrassed or afraid to use it. So make sure it's really easy to use it. Second, you can also try a new or perhaps just a different approach to leadership, such as developing and utilizing soft skills like just empathy, reflective listening, or just spending more time checking in on how your employees are doing. Just asking those questions here and there can make a big, big difference. They can open up deeper conversations. Next, I strongly suggest that you really encourage employees to report any mental health concerns or issues that they've observed in the workplace, not just about themselves, but other people as well. Either make this anonymous or reiterate that there will absolutely be no retaliation or punishment for reporting anything of concern. Some interesting podcasts I've recorded with folks who, saved the day by having people report things, and they put a stop to what could have been a really violent outcome. And then lastly, solicit employee feedback about what programs or initiatives would just make them feel more supported when it comes to mental health or psychological safety. You actually might be pretty surprised by the feedback, especially since this just has not been an area, historically speaking, that many organizations have spent a good deal of time on. Katie, back to you.
Yeah, thanks. I do want to go ahead and pause here. John, just to clarify something on an earlier slide, when it said that some employees aren't comfortable having an open dialogue about mental health, do you know if they were talking about with their employer or supervisor, or if that's with coworkers, or is it both?
We did not ask, that's another great opportunity for next year's survey. We did not differentiate between whether they would speak to a colleague or direct manager about mental health concerns. We did specify that it was in a work context. So the data point that you just saw reflects employees' perception of being able to talk about it in a work setting.
I see. Thank you for that. And then, Peter, I'm going to give this one to you. Mental health is a sensitive topic. So do you recommend communicating about mental health related topics or incidents differently than maybe other types of emergencies or scenarios?
Yeah, it's true that this is a sensitive topic, but I'd start with, it's important to help desensitize it. I think that's a big thing that we can all work on. You don't want to minimize the importance of mental health, but you do want to reduce the stigma around talking about it. That's the key of what I'm trying to say. Now, that's a cultural and social issue that's going to take a while. So in the meantime, definitely provide people with the ability to communicate with trusted individuals like outside mental health providers, or provide means of anonymous reporting. That's really important.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And then, John, I'm going to go back to you. Did you see mental health data being reported differently by age or other diversity? How did the demographics weigh in on this one?
We did compare and contrast against various generational groups. essentially, we found that it's very important to all. There were not any statistical differences between younger generations and older generations. We actually thought that that might be the case, but it was fairly consistent across all.
Excellent. Okay, thank you both. That's definitely interesting. And let's go ahead and move on to our next data point here. So John, what do you have for us?
All right, thanks, Katie. We're in the home stretch here. We've hit on a lot of opportunities for improvement. And as I mentioned earlier, we promised we wanted to give you some very specific concrete things that employees said would be meaningful to them for organizations looking for ways to improve the perception of safety at work. So over the next couple slides, we'll cover some of those items. So we asked specifically for employees to tell us what they thought would make them feel safer at work. Specifically, what could your employer do to demonstrate that they cared about your safety? And this chart highlights some of the most common responses. So right off the bat, you can see it really comes down to communication, as Peter's been discussing through the presentation. So 35% said that they wanted their employer to communicate about safety plans and policies. They wanted to know exactly what the organization is doing, what they care about. 31% said that they wanted their employer to be more transparent when there are workplace incidents. So again, I mentioned that earlier, but pretty much regardless of the incident, whether it's a traditional, workplace injury or something like a mental health issue at work, employees felt that they should know about it. And then, we also saw that a pretty decent number of employees wanted better safety trainings and more regular safety talks. And they just, generally wanted safety to be more front and center in terms of company culture. Many also noted they wanted an easier process for reporting incidents and providing feedback. And Peter just made a great point on this, which is, it's really about feeling like I can report things without any fear of retribution. So you can see at the bottom, mental health resources and greater flexibility to work remotely also showed up here. And that's pretty consistent with some of the other research that we've covered today. So finally, before I hand it back over to Peter, just a few stats that we thought were good to keep in mind and really speak to what we can all do to make our teams feel safer in the workplace. So the first stat here on the left really speaks to the disconnect between employees' workplace preferences and their perception of their employer. 84% said there was at least one thing that they could be doing to make them feel more prepared to navigate some type of crisis, event, or emergency at work. In the center, 40% of employees said that they felt safety training should be mandatory or more regular. We thought that was a fairly astounding number, given that I think a lot of the discourse typically is around like, oh, yet another meeting or yet another training, but there's a fairly large population of employees say, sign me up, this is important to me and I want to be involved. And then, lastly, 40% of employees said that they would feel unsafe if their employer failed to notify them about some type of safety incident at work. So, again, we think that speaks pretty directly to the importance of, meeting your employees where they are, ensuring they feel connected to the organization's efforts to keep them safe, and doing whatever you can within reason to involve them in the process so that they know that you care about this and are investing time and resources where they can be better cared for. So Peter, I'll hand it over to you. What are some final recommendations that come to mind for you?
Yeah, I think the way you can use this data is pretty simple. Take the suggestions from employees that John just shared with us. Employees really want to be prepared for emergencies at work. They need a clear understanding of how to stay safe while working, and they absolutely feel safer and more prepared when they're directly involved in their company's safety decisions and programs. I also suggest reviewing the cadence and the structure of your drills and exercises. Some of the industry experts that I've spoken with on the Employee Safety Podcast suggest using a combination of things like tabletop exercises, online trainings, and in-person drills. Using shorter, more bite-sized training has absolutely been seen to be very effective. And I mentioned that earlier. That's what people really want. They don't want more longer training. They want more short training. Many organizations use third parties or consulting companies to facilitate these exercises, which can really help offer an outside perspective. Sometimes that's what people need. And then we also suggest you involve emergency services like your local police department, EMS, and fire department. Your meet and greet with these folks really shouldn't be during an actual emergency. You can also use this information to empower your employees to take an active role in their own safety. So definitely solicit their feedback, like I mentioned before. Ask for suggestions on training or exercises, find out what's working for them and what's not in terms of preparedness. And then you can even reward your employees for being the first to respond to a message on emergency preparedness or some other incentives like that. It's just little things like that which can really add up to make a difference. The key to remember is that safety is everyone's job. All right, I know we're going to stop in just a second and take some final audience questions here in just a moment, but let's just quickly look at this summary of key takeaways to wrap up. First, show employees that you prioritize their safety and well-being above all else. That's really critical, and that's got to come from the top down. Second, protect all workers by monitoring and communicating about the evolving threat landscape. They got to know that you understand it, you're communicating about it. Next, equip your business travelers with situational awareness and clear communication pathways. They need to know who to contact. And then also include and prioritize mental health in your safety culture. That's just huge. And it sounds like you guys all understand that. And then lastly, be more transparent with communication and offer better safety training. Better means a lot of different things. It's a big gray area, but the big thing we hear is shorter training, like shorter bite-sized trainings. So Katie, back over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter. Let's go to our final, opportunity for some feedback here. John, let me ask you, why do you think employers do not prepare employees more for emergencies? Anything beyond obvious things like time and cost?
Yeah, I'd love to actually hear Peter's perspective on this, but I think it's hard for many. I think for a lot of organizations, it does come down to the desire to, first, I want to let people know about what's going on in their environment that potentially poses a risk, but to do that, I need to know who's impacted, what's going on. I need to feel empowered to send that communication out to employees. And for a lot of organizations, that's a lot of complexity to navigate. So Peter, I know you have these conversations every day. Any thoughts there?
I mean, the biggest ones are obvious, which the questioner asked. It's time and cost, it's resources, just not being able to do it. But it's also just not knowing how to do it. I think people seem to think in terms of long trainings that happen once a year, maybe twice a year, something like that, as opposed to having a bit of fun with it. Typically, if you can have fun with a serious topic like this, people tend to pay attention more and they remember. So, someone said to me once, sitting through a 1-hour session on how to help someone having a heart attack is not the same as walking around randomly and telling people, hey, quick emergency, there's someone, this is not real, it's a test. There's someone over in the stairwell that's having a heart attack. What do you do? And then it's just a 5-minute session and it makes people go, oh my God, I have no idea. And then that opens them up to seeking more information about what to do in a situation like that. And there's an enormous amount of things you can do that with. So it's all about how you position it. And I think a lot of people just don't know how to do that well.
Well, guys, this has been excellent, but I do want to go ahead and let the audience know how they can find this full report that we've been talking about at length. So let me go ahead and launch our last poll, and then we'll get to a handy dandy QR code that you can use. So we would just like to know right now if you'd like to hear more about how AlertMedia can help you improve employee safety at your organization. You've heard from John, you've heard from Peter today, but AlertMedia actually has an entire team of experienced experts that would be happy to talk to you about your specific needs. So just take a moment to let us know. You can choose yes, and we will get you some more information, or you can say no, not at this time. And of course, no hard feelings. We'll always be here if you need us. So I'm going to give that just another couple seconds. And I think we can go ahead and close out that poll now. All right. And then as I promised, here is a handy dandy QR code that you can use right now to download the report. The full comprehensive report, as we've been saying all along, has way more information, a lot of great takeaways. But also, if you don't want to get out your cell phone right this moment, we're going to email it to you. So that's one of the benefits of being a registrant for today's webinar. So be on the lookout for that directly in your inbox. And at this time, I really just want to thank you guys, John and Peter. Thank you for being here. It's great to get such an insider scoop on this data. So John, thank you so much for your time and for being here.
It was my pleasure, and I appreciate all the great questions. And if anyone has ideas on how we can continue to improve this research in future years and make it more insightful and useful, feel free to reach out to Peter or myself. We'd love your feedback.
And Peter, thank you so much for your time as well.
Absolutely. Really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, everyone.
All right, well, that is all we have for you today. We really appreciate you taking the time to participate and engage, and we really hope to see you at a future Alert Media webinar. Always nice to see familiar names and faces. And of course, I want to thank Safety and Health for having us today and being such an amazing partner. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to you, Kevin.
Okay. Well, thank you, Katie. No, we certainly thank you all in kind and most excellent today. A great job to you, John and Peter. And once more, thanks for your insights and expertise. As we are concluding today, unfortunately, we've run out of time. Just a reminder that any unanswered questions will be forwarded on to our speakers. And then another note in conclusion, just want to let everyone know about the evaluation survey that we're asking you to complete. The survey will open in a different screen after this webinar, and we really appreciate your input as it helps us improve our future webcasts. So thank you for taking those minute or a couple minutes with that. With that, we end today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast. Again, we'd like to thank Katie Goen, John Yarbrough, Peter Steinfeld, everyone at Alert Media, and all of you who listened in. Thanks and have a great day.